Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, why cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin seem to point to the future, but operate more like the Wild West of old. Also this week, Afghanistan. We'll ask what the economic future looks like for Afghans struggling to escape poverty, loss of livelihood and insecurity. And
I'm Yaraba Moham, and I'm at an international artificial intelligence gathering in Melbourne, Australia, where global AI leaders are calling for a ban on lethal autonomous weapons.
The world's top central bankers have been gathering in Wyoming in the US this week for their annual Jackson Hole Symposium. Now, globally, we're seeing steps away from the loose monetary policy that was put into place in the aftermath of the financial crisis. There's a sense that the world economy is slowly entering a new phase, a digital phase. Now, the next generation of central bankers may well have to deal with things such as the regulation of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. This month, Bitcoin, the most well-known of all cryptocurrencies, hit an all-time high. The price of Bitcoin has soared from less than $20 back in 2012 to around $4,000 currently. Now, at the moment, all those central bankers gathering in the US have a monopoly on printing money. It's how they manage the economy and inflation. Cryptocurrencies, in contrast, are created using digital technology called blockchain. It's a borderless, anonymous way of using and creating online money. But most importantly, and this is where the big change is, if you pardon the pun, it's completely decentralized. No one person has total control, so no banks. Its value comes from the network of people using it, and the use of cryptocurrencies is growing. So let's recap. Cryptocurrencies are a form of digital money designed to be secure, and they don't need banks to issue them. Bitcoin was the first such decentralized currency. More and more businesses, large and small, accept Bitcoin payments every day. But over 900 newer coins like Ethereum, Zcash, Litecoin and Ripple have sprung up. You may have heard of initial coin offerings or ICOs. It's where people invest in startups using digital currencies. But in a way, they're a victim of their own success. It's exactly because cryptocurrencies are not regulated and offer anonymous ways to transfer funds that criminals, like drug dealers, like to use them. And authorities, like central banks, simply don't trust them. Joining us now from Cape Town is Lou Klassen. Lou runs South Africa-based Newtown Partners, a venture capital firm that invests in early-stage technology startups. And Lou is also the executive director of the Washington-based Bitcoin Foundation, a non-profit corporation that wants to promote the use of Bitcoin. Lou, thanks for being with us. How would you describe central banks' attitude to cryptocurrencies right now?
So I think that everybody's a little bit nervous about a technology which ultimately has the potential to make dramatic changes to the financial system. In particular, I think there are concerns about its potential use for tax evasion and for money laundering. I think that a research report that has just recently come out from the European Commission in June 2017, though, suggests that in reality there is not nearly as much illegal activity happening using these kinds of technologies, and that really they are transformative and ultimately more about financial inclusion than they are about creating harm.
So is greater regulation the answer then?
There isn't enough risk at this stage to warrant a crackdown on a technology that is ultimately more about improving the system than it is about harming the system, and that regulators should take the approach of saying, let's see where this goes before we decide on how we're going to regulate.
As far as the most established cryptocurrency is concerned, Bitcoin, is it really worth $4,000 a coin at the moment? Are we seeing a cryptocurrency mania, a bubble here, a gold rush, and is it going to burst, that bubble?
So I think that we have a couple of different things going on here. Number one is that there's this virtuous cycle of, as more people get into the space, they tell their friends hear about the returns that are being generated in fairly short amounts of time, and so forth. And so the story kind of goes around that if you're not getting in now, you're missing out on the deal of a lifetime. And I think that I don't view Bitcoin or most of the cryptocurrencies ultimately as an investment vehicle. I think I view them more as a long-term store of value. In the short term, right now, is Bitcoin worth $4,000? Certainly, there's enough evidence to suggest that its very nature of having a limited supply tends to create a situation where if people are not selling, as more market participants enter, the price will rise. And that's kind of what we've got going on here. We've also got, frankly, some market manipulation, or at least some evidence of market manipulation by an exchange in Hong Kong. And so I would say that right now at $4,000, if you were looking at it as a short-term opportunity, the risks are very high that by the end of the year, we're expecting the price of Bitcoin would probably go up to about $5,000, and shortly thereafter, and pretty dramatically correct down to about $2,000, $2,300. So the long-term view is that it's certainly going to be, or we expect that it should be, a valuable asset to have. We don't know what that price is going to be. Certainly, there are very high risks of buying into Bitcoin at this stage. We do expect high volatility to continue. So if you're going to buy, I would suggest that you buy small amounts of Bitcoin using money that you're quite happy to lose, and to hold onto those Bitcoins for as long as possible, and not engage in short-term trading, which will be very high risk.
Do you foresee a time, Lou, when cryptocurrencies will replace real-world currencies? Is there going to come a time when we'll all be using them?
I think that what it does, rather than replace, is it gives us choice. So right now, we essentially have no say in what happens with the money and how the central banks control that money. And so whether or not, and certainly, we can affect these kinds of things at the poll, but for the most part, the average person doesn't get to have a say on whether or not the central bank is going to increase inflation, decrease inflation, increase money supply, change interest rates, these kinds of things. And one might say, well, they're not really qualified and they shouldn't be involved in those decisions. The challenge is that we have a very fragile global financial system at the moment, and government debt is at record highs. And so I think that what it does is it gives us another option aside from gold that we can fairly easily move into and out of, depending on whether or not our governments look after and act responsibly with our money. I mean, if we look at the long-term value of, say, for example, the dollar and effective inflation on that, we've had over the last 100 years, 95% of the value of a dollar wiped out by inflation. And so I don't think that it ever replaces the system, but I do think that what it does is give us the option of holding our monetary authorities to a higher standard than just being able to do what they want with our money.
Finally, Lou, which countries are most cryptocurrency friendly right now? Who's embracing this technology?
Once again, it's very early days, and it's kind of difficult to say with absolute certainty. For example, Switzerland has certainly been one which has kept an open mind to these kinds of technologies and adopting a wait-and-see approach, not heavily regulating and encouraging within controlled environments testing with the technologies. Singapore has adopted a similar kind of approach. Malta has adopted that kind of approach. So we're certainly seeing some countries that are... Japan has taken a slightly different approach, in the sense that Japan has legalized Bitcoin as equivalent to money, but there are many, many strings attached to being able to, for example, get a license that enables you to trade it as if it is money. And I think Australia is going to take a similar kind of approach. So our view on it at this stage is that it is early. I in fact think it's even too early for regulators to take the perspective that it is equivalent to money, because there are so many unknown issues with this technology and ultimately how it will be used. Certainly, from my perspective, I think Switzerland's approach is correct. I think Singapore, up until very recently, was viewed as being very progressive. Their position on initial coin offerings or ICOs that are quite similar, unfortunately, to a statement put out by the SEC from the US not too long ago, which suggests that the default position on these cryptocurrency tokens is going to be that they'll be securities. And I think that that's it's too early to say that, and will do some harm to whether or not fintech startups are going to relocate their operations to Singapore. So at this stage, our shining light is Switzerland.
Lou, it's been really great to talk to you. Absolutely fascinating. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
You're welcome.
Staying in the digital economy, some experts believe that artificial intelligence is developing at such a pace that it's leaving government regulators behind. This week, a group of AI founders called for a ban on the technology's use to design weapons. That call is to prevent the sort of nightmare scenarios previously confined to science fiction. Yara Bomelem reports.
Say the words killer robots and Hollywood franchise Terminator may come to mind. But while artificial intelligence experts say that sort of advancement in autonomous lethal weapons is decades off, other systems are already being developed, including Russia's robot tank. BAE Systems' long-range autonomous missile bomber and Samsung Sentry gun, which can fire at will and is already deployed along South Korea's demilitarized zone. But at a leading artificial intelligence conference being held in Melbourne, global AI founders have released an open letter calling for a ban on the development and deployment of autonomous lethal weapons. Professor Toby Walsh authored the statement.
There's an arms race happening in developing this technology, and it's going to be a revolution, a step change in how we fight war. These are going to be weapons of mass destruction, they're going to be weapons of terror. Despots and terrorist organizations will get their hands on them. We do have an opportunity not to go down that road.
The global gathering is showcasing positive AI uses as well as advances in the field, including the control of a robot arm through brainwaves. The robots here beside me and others like them at this conference are the friendly face of AI. A United Nations convention will meet in November to discuss whether to ban autonomous lethal weapons. But not all participants here are convinced a blanket ban is the best way to go. Dr. Virginia Dignam consults for the Dutch military and says positive uses of AI in war need to be explored.
Robots will be less led by emotions. If the robot is autonomous, it is not only autonomous to kill, but also to take the decision not to kill. And the option is some things which we really need much more investigation, and the ban will impede that type of investigations.
Other AI researchers disagree.
The idea that you would design a machine that can decide to kill a human is a pretty simple thing that you'd want to ban.
The challenge now, as with all technologies, is to bring AI under ethical and legal control and decide whether that is even possible with autonomous weapons.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, a conviction for the Samsung Heir, but can South Korea get its powerful chaebols under control? But first, the price of plain old vanilla, at least the pods, may come as a shock to some. That's because vanilla is now officially a luxury item. The price per kilo has risen from about $100 in 2015 to a never-before-seen peak of between $600 and $700. That jump came after a cyclone struck plantations on the island of Madagascar in March. 80% of the world's vanilla is produced there. WPP, the world's biggest ad agency, just issued its worst sales forecast since the financial crisis. It's predicting growth of 0 to 1% this year. That's down from a previous forecast of 2%. WPP said that its core customers, multinationals like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, are spending less. Why? Well, WPP is putting the blame on technology disruption and uncertainty over Trumponomics. France's Total is poised to become Europe's second-largest offshore oil operator ahead of BP. That's after Denmark's AP Moller-Maersk agreed to sell its oil and gas division to the energy giant. The $7.45 billion deal is expected to close in the first quarter of 2018. And bullet trains from China's capital Beijing to Shanghai are set to become the fastest in the world. From next week, some of the trains will be allowed to run at 350 kilometers an hour. The top speed of the trains had been cut after 2 collisions killed 40 people in 2011. The new high-speed bullet trains are named Fuxing, which means rejuvenation in Chinese. Now, the heir to the world's biggest smartphone maker and one of the most profitable chip makers has been found guilty of corruption. Samsung heir J.Y. Lee has been sentenced to 5 years in prison in South Korea. The conviction raises questions about the future of the country's powerful conglomerates known as chaebols. Kathy Novak reports.
Samsung is more than a household name in South Korea. Its reach extends from technology to hospitals and even sports teams. The saying here goes, what's good for Samsung is good for the country, even if it might involve some questionable dealings with the highest levels of government.
When you have political leadership on one hand and then an economic leadership closely cooperating with each other, you can achieve a lot of things in a very faster pace. And that kind of delivery was something that we needed during the earlier part of the industrialization.
J.Y. Lee's family maintains its control of the group of dozens of companies through a complicated web of cross-shareholdings. The prosecution in this case accused Lee of effectively bribing the former president Park Geun-hye in exchange for government support of a merger of two of those companies. It said that helped him cement his grip on power and shore up his succession plan, with his father in hospital since 2014. Lee was accused of paying or promising about $38 million to Park's close friend Choi Soon-sil. It's part of the corruption scandal that sparked mass protests and eventually led to Park's impeachment. Lee admitted to making the payments, but said they were not bribes. His lawyers painted him as a victim of Park's abuse of power. More and more people in South Korea are now demanding those who abuse their power be held accountable.
Younger generation and more people are realizing that what's good for Samsung is not necessarily good for Korea in the long run. Now, justice, fairness, and openness is much more important.
But even with its de facto leader behind bars since February, the company continued to do well. Samsung Electronics recently announced record operating profits, largely analysts say because J.Y. Lee wasn't needed to make day-to-day decisions. Former President Park and her friend Choi are facing separate trials, and the verdict here is likely to have an effect on their outcomes.
Egypt has criticized a U.S. decision to withhold $195 million in military aid and to cut $96 million in other aid over human rights concerns. Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. military aid after Israel, receiving $1.3 billion in annual support. The unspent money will be held back until Egypt shows some progress on human rights abuses and the law regulating NGOs. 7 months into his presidency, US President Donald Trump has recommitted the United States to fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. America's longest war has dragged on now for nearly 16 years. It's claimed more than 100,000 lives and cost the US more than $700 billion. The Afghan economy is in tatters, and that's despite years of US and allied involvement. Around 35% of its population is unemployed or lives below the poverty line. Afghanistan's government currently controls just half of the country, and economic activity currently remains overall affected by the large security challenges. The Afghan government wants foreign investment in order to grow its economy, but there's widespread corruption and a lack of infrastructure. Many, though, point to Afghanistan's potential. 10 years ago, a United States Geological Survey study identified deposits of iron ore, copper, and rare earth minerals in Afghanistan. Its untapped mineral wealth is estimated to have a potential value of as much as $1 trillion. Joining us now from Kabul, Shahab Rahim. Shahab's an analyst of Afghanistan's economy, amongst many other things. Good to have you with us on Counting the Cost, sir. So, you've got all this untapped mineral wealth, a young population there in Afghanistan that's just raring to go, looking for opportunities. Here comes the million-dollar question. With the security situation as it is, how do you get Kabul's economy to realize its potential?
Every year, 400,000 young Afghans are joining the job market, looking for jobs in a situation where the political situation is getting uncertain, the security situation is getting worse day by day, and this is where the international community's role comes in. This is where the real challenge for Afghan begins, where after 2014, the international aid has reduced the security transition, the economic transition, and the political transition took place. But after this three-dimensional transition, we are still uncertain about Afghanistan's economy and the future of Afghan young generation in the region.
To what extent is corruption the main issue that's holding the Afghan economy back?
This is a big problem starting from the recruitment to the bigger projects that are implemented in the country. Other than that, the mega projects, for example, the mega infrastructure projects and the mining projects are all struggling with the issues of corruption. They are not going anywhere at the moment. There are some of the interventions that the government has taken. For example, the National Procurement Authority, which is presided by the president himself. They are looking over the bigger projects, but that is just limited to those few bigger projects. But the administrative corruption that is going on in all the public sector, that still remains a big question mark, and that still is a big hurdle for Afghan government to take the country forward from this point on.
What do you make of President Trump's hint this week that he wanted to see India giving more help economically to Afghanistan, which of course is a landlocked country? It shares a border with Pakistan. That's going to cause some political problems, isn't it? What does the country need to do to attract more direct foreign investment?
First things first, important thing is that India's role increases in Afghanistan since they are investing in the infrastructure projects. We can see their investment in the Salma Dam, one of the biggest infrastructure projects. Along with that, the preparation of the Afghan parliament building, and then other services sectors that Indians are playing. They can play a very important role in the economic development of Afghanistan.
Okay, Shoaib, really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you very much.
And finally this week, there was a financial focus at this year's Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland. Charlie Angela explains.
It looks like a casino, but it's the members of the audience who are the gamblers, and they're betting on the global economy.
Loans to the government with a promised value of $5 million.
Inspired by the financial crisis, the director's aim is to empower the public with an understanding of how our financial system works in under 2 hours.
My reaction too before I started researching this is I don't know anything about money. And I also don't want to know. It's like I'm an artist and no money, I don't care. But the problem is, of course, is like it's so dominating our life and the way we do things, and that we don't have the luxury anymore not to care about it.
Lies is an interactive theatrical experience.
More money is circulating, we're inventing new markets, and we can be optimistic about our future.
Where 42 audience members are sucked into a world of markets, banks and deals, and their morals are tested.
Each of these tables represents a country, and each audience member represents a bank. They're encouraged to merge with each other, bet on each other's failure, and most of all, take risks.
And please roll the dice.
As each country builds up its wealth, the banks are invited by the croupier to make more speculative investments. Credit ratings rise, but then comes the crash. Another act at Edinburgh trying to demystify the markets is economist and comedian Susie Steed. She's taking audiences on a walking tour of the city while explaining the history of capitalism with props.
I'm interested in why economics is seen as being really complicated and something that we shouldn't think about. Because I think the thing about doing it around the city as well is looking at the place names, looking at who lived there, and asking where the money came from to do a lot of things that we've built. And those are quite simple questions that anyone can engage with.
Susie covers subjects from slavery to the Bank of England, and as with the play Lies, the audience may walk away with a deeper understanding of economics and possibly an enthusiasm for more compassionate capitalism.
And that is our show for this week. If there's anything you've seen you'd like to comment on, please get in touch with us. You can follow and tweet me at @afinnegan on Twitter using the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us a line. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan. From the whole team here in Doha, thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.